No one cares how many die in the shellings in this war. You know that they brought crematoriums with them. Yes, they simply brought crematoriums with them. That is, they knew in advance that they were not going to show to their families, to their mothers, what happened to their children, that they died here, that they were killed here, that they came here to kill us, and we are defending us, our freedom, our houses, and that's why they're dying. We do not want to kill them. People say, forget about this and that, about apocalypse, the end of the world. The end of the world has arrived.
Joining me now, my friend Darryl Cooper, who always has an interesting perspective on pretty much everything. He's, of course, with Martyrmade. Everybody knows that. He's also the researcher and writer and co-host of the Unraveling podcast. Darryl, I understand that it is the new thing to throw a Ukrainian flag in your social media picture and all that. I get all that. I don't want to be a cynical guy. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. But all this looks inevitable to me. It looks like there is only going to be one end to this, whether people like it or not. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. There was a lot of wishful thinking going on early on about the possibility of the Ukrainians putting up a long-term defense against Russian forces. And that really has ignored the fact that the Russians have total escalation dominance in this situation. The harder the Ukrainians make it for them, the Russians can always make it 1% harder on the Ukrainians. And we really have to ask ourselves whether it's really even better for the Ukrainians if this thing ends very quickly, or if they put up this long-term heroic resistance, which would cause tremendous suffering for the Ukrainian people.
Darryl, it's so funny you brought that up because I was actually having that private conversation with the wife this morning of, look, everyone loves a David versus Goliath story. Everyone loves the Spartan 300, remember the Alamo. Everybody loves that story, but do we really want, how many Ukrainians have to die so we can cheer on a Hollywood movie story? I mean, that's what it seems like is happening here. Am I out of line? Should we be doing no-fly zones and sending in the fighter jets?
No, of course not. And fortunately, I think that the military brass in NATO, as well as the Department of Defense, understands that well enough to be able to push back against the politicians who don't think of those kinds of considerations. But this is one of the reasons why this situation is so dangerous. Maybe more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis. Because today we don't have the Eisenhowers and the Kennedys and the Kennans and the Kissingers to navigate us through this situation. We are relying on a senile old man whose son was caught taking bribes from a Ukrainian oligarch. That's where we are. That's who we're counting on. The people who thought Iraq and Libya were a good idea, who handled the withdrawal from Afghanistan, that's who we're counting on. But then it may even be worse than that. Because you have to ask yourself who these people are really taking their orders from. Who's Joe Biden really taking his orders from? And the answer in the last several years is they're basically taking their orders from the mob. There's a name for this. It's called autocracy, government by the mob. You think about when Trump met Putin in Helsinki, or when he was meeting with Kim Jong-un, and how angry people were that Trump just showed basic politeness to these two leaders of nuclear-armed states, like him or not. It didn't matter that he was putting real military or economic pressure on Russia and North Korea. That didn't matter. They wanted the emotional release of seeing the American president spit in their faces. That's the kind of demand that a mob makes. It's the kind of emotional release that a mob demands from their leaders. And that's a very frightening situation.
It is a frightening situation, and you brought up nukes earlier, and I realize this has been at least in the back of everyone's mind, but I think people fool themselves into thinking that Vladimir Putin's the type of guy who wouldn't use them, or that people wouldn't use them. That the history of the world is not a history of nations holding powerful military technology and not using it. That is not what the history of the world tells me.
That's right. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily worry so much about a first strike on Washington, D.C., although if that was the sole target, I better not say that on air. But I could see Vladimir Putin, for example, doing something like using a tactical nuke on a depopulated area, say a power plant or something, out of the way with not a lot of people around, using a small tactical nuke just to send the message that, hey, this is on the table, just to make sure everybody's clear on that. Because the history of our relations with Russia since Putin took over has essentially been dominated by this tendency of ours to not take anything that they say seriously. When they say that Ukraine is a red line for us, they will not join NATO, either de jure or de facto. It's not going to happen, and we will go to the mat for that. We didn't believe them, and now this is where we're at.
Hey, thanks so much for watching the first on YouTube. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and like and subscribe. You heard me. Like it, subscribe. You'll get a lot more of it and a lot more of me.